Hello and welcome to Movie Marathon Mood. It's the show where we watch a bunch of movies and then we talk about them. It's as simple as that. On this episode, we're honoring the late, great Sean Connery. We're talking three of his crime thrillers: The Great Train Robbery, The Untouchables, and finally, Entrapment. It's a lot to talk about, covering three different decades from Connery's career. It's all right here on Movie Marathon Mood. Stick around.
This next gentleman requires no introduction. For the first time on our program, ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to one of my favorite actors, Sean Connery. Sean Connery. Oh, boy. Wow. Where can I get me one of them jetpacks?
I just came from Europe.
That was very thrilling. Did you enjoy that?
Well, my voice is about 2 tones higher, but it's not.
A snug fit, eh?
Yeah.
You didn't get that jetpack at the electronics store around the corner, did you?
Yeah, Charlie gave it to me.
I can't get over what an impression that makes when you just drop down there in that cloud of smoke. How you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine. I'm really here to sort of quell these rumors about my death.
Oh, really? Have there been rumors that you have passed away?
Yeah, something like that.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, well, I was too until I heard that it's good luck in the Orient to consider that when they say you've been announced dead and you're still alive, it means longevity.
Oh, well, good. Congratulations, then.
No, what happened, basically, it's a bit of a farce, like most things. Dear friend of mine, James Hunt, the racing driver, he died.
World champion.
He lived near me in Marbella, and it was picked up as James Bond. And then it went on to the press, and then it was picked up in Japan the same day that the ex-governor of Texas,
John Connolly. Yeah.
But then, of course, John Connolly is like Sean Connery in Japanese. And this is absolute gospel. And then it went to France and Spain, and people were phoning up all over, and very few people ever know where I am, even me, And anyway, that was the sort of finale of that one.
And you say very few people ever really know where you are, and you say you're not sure, but really, where are you? Where does a guy like you hang around? Where you live in Spain most of the time?
Well, I was up there for 20 minutes.
Hi, I'm Jesse Gilstrap, joined as always by my pal, friend, partner in crime, Drew Cordell. Drew, my friend, how are you?
I'm quite well, Jesse. How about yourself?
Hanging in there. So this is our second episode we've done that was inspired, at least, to somewhat memorialize somebody who recently passed away. And the thing is, too, like, that's the inspiration. That's the thing that pushes that way. But it's also not really the intent of the series, of doing Movie Marathon Mood.
Right.
So we always find a theme of some sort. And I don't think there is a way for most people to categorically have a series of movies and say that's their career.
Right.
Like, you could try to do like, oh, these are the essentials. Like, recently they did a 4K collection that were the Alfred Hitchcock essentials, and it's like Psycho, The Birds, Vertigo, and Rear Window. And if you're going to pick 4 movies from Hitchcock, those are pretty good.
Yeah.
If you're only going to watch 4. But does that tell you Hitchcock's career?
No.
Not even close. And to be fair, Hitchcock had a lot of movies, which I happen to have seen all of them. and it's a lot. It's over 50 movies that he made throughout some of the biggest changes in film history. So that's a particularly wide and expansive career, but I still think that's true for most people in the industry. It's like you can't boil it down. So I really don't think there'd be a good way to do a fully encapsulating memorial episode for anybody in the first place. But that being said, we're gonna try to do like a action crime thrillers of Sean Connery, the one, the only Sean Connery.
Yes. Yes, yes.
And we're gonna be doing over 3 decades from his career, like 3 different decades that these movies come from, the 70s, 80s, and the 90s. So that's not by any means encapsulating his career, but that's a pretty wide expanse. Obviously, we've already talked about a lot of Connery
Yeah.
on Movie Marathon Mood. All of our Connery Bond episodes have already been uploaded for a while. So
Yes.
if Connery's remembered for one thing, it's mostly going to be as James Bond. But you look over his career, and he did way more than just James Bond. And I mean, I grew up with Connery, and the very first movie I remember watching in a movie theater is The Last Crusade. And at some point, we'll talk about Indiana Jones, of course, but I it's hard for me not to tie Connery to my relationship with movies
Right.
because I was 5 years old. I remember sitting in the movie theater watching him as Indiana Jones's father.
Right.
That's Connery in movies. That's synonymous with one another for me. And
Yeah.
obviously, throughout the 1990s in particular, he had a really good run, being this elder statesman of the industry. I will have a little bit of fun though too here, just talking about the end of his career, which like I don't blame him at all for running off into the sunset and enjoying his life in Scotland. Like no, he doesn't owe us anything. He didn't owe us anything. He had every right to spend time with his family and enjoy retirement. But I still find the story of the end of his career hilarious because he turned down the Matrix because he didn't understand the script. And he was supposedly going to be Morpheus in the Matrix, which obviously that no way that would be anything like Lawrence Fishburne's take.
Right.
It'd been a different movie. And it could have been a great movie. But he eventually sees the Matrix and he says, well, crap, that was really good. It was a big hit, changed the industry, did all types of great things, and he just didn't understand the script. Then
Yeah.
he turns down Lord of the Rings because he was going to be Gandalf, which obviously Ian McKellen is Gandalf at this point.
Right.
But he turned it down because he didn't understand the script. Who knows what that would have looked like if Connery is Gandalf?
You shall not pass.
I mean, I can definitely see it. I see this whole movie, and it's fantastic.
Right. Oh yeah.
It's fantastic in a totally different way. But regardless of which, he turned it down. It turned out to be this incredible big hit, award-winning thing. Well, crap, like he missed out again. So then he gets a script for something that he is told, quite rightly, is a great piece of writing, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Like the lineage for that, that's great material.
Right.
And it's like, well, Lord of the Rings was great material as well, and he just didn't understand it when he saw the scripts, but has this incredible lineage. Well, here's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. That's a great property, he's told. Doesn't get it, but why not? Sign me up. And then that movie comes out. And it is what it is. And that's when it's like, oh crap, I guess I'm just going to quit acting altogether. Ride off into the sunset and spend time rest of his days in Scotland, peaceful, away from the industry. But again, like he deserved it.
Right.
And he gave us decades worth of great movies and starring roles. And uh, on top of that, he could play a Russian in a Scottish accent, and
Yes,
nobody cares because it's still awesome.
right. And in Highlander, he played Juan Santos Vilos Ramirez, a Egyptian Spaniard, but was still Scottish Sean Connery. Uh, and nobody cared. Everybody loves him in that movie too. And of course, you make reference to Hunt for October, uh, him playing Marco Ramius. Uh, a great, two great films right there. I think it goes back to the charm of Connery because
Yeah,
he can take those logistics out of your mind with his charisma. And it's not just his personality, he's still acting. He just chooses not to do the accents, but that's okay. I don't I've never had a problem with that, and most people have not because I agree with your assessment that many people, like us, grew up with him, and he's obviously still beloved because his passing kind of had a huge reaction, and a lot of people were talking about how much he inspired them, or if they worked with him, how kind he was to them in their career. I remember Alec Baldwin, staying on Hunt for October for a minute, said had some really great things to say about Sean. um, Several actors did, and just other musicians and other things. Just that's one of the cool things about social media. And a lot of times we get hung up on the negative aspects of it, but one of the cool things is when something like this happens, someone passes, it's really interesting to see who all is affected by it and who their legacies had an impact on. And it's Sean's was very wide reaching, and I'm excited to talk about his crime thrillers. And the Great Train Robbery is one we've decided on, and I'm really excited about it because I'm a huge Michael Crichton fan, as I know you are too. And to see kind of his directorial work, um, and to see Sean in a movie that's widely regarded to be great, I really can't wait to see it. It's something I've wanted to see since I was, since I was probably in middle school. So I've always wanted to see that one, but I just never have. And then of course the Untouchables, which we'll briefly talk about here in a minute. I'm not going to say anything about it just yet. Uh, but Entrapment, which other than Sean being on the posters, all I can remember about that movie is Catherine Zeta Jones' ass, because that was their marketing push. And I did see the movie, but that's her moving around with lasers was all I remember about it. So it'll be fun to go back and watch that movie because honestly, I really don't remember much about it. And but I remember liking him in it. It's very rare. I have not liked Sean Connery. I don't think there's ever been anything that I didn't like Sean Connery in. I may not like the movie, but like League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is the perfect example because it is just such a terrible movie.
yeah, he's good in it.
But Sean's still Sean in it, and he's still charming, and he he probably adds a little more class to it than it deserves. But yeah, I'm very interested to watch these, and but just the Untouchables. Talk about just one of my favorite movies ever. Brian de Palma is a great director. I think I know if anybody's read your blogs, you've reviewed all his films. Um, I know you appreciate him, but like outside of people that really love to study film, I don't think he gets talked about as much as he should.
He's talked about probably the least of his class.
Right. But he's such a talented visionary, and the fact that he made a uh, a gangster related film that had just this incredible cast of Costner, a very young Kevin Costner, Sean Connery, and one of his I would say this is one of his more iconic later career roles as Malone. Um, but of course, De Niro as Al Capone, um, and that's not even the full extent of it. It's a great cast, and then a great score by Ennio Morricone.
Yeah.
It's just it's a great film, and I can't wait to watch it again. Uh, this is something I don't think I've told you before, or maybe I have. But this was kind of my gateway to like organized crime movies, because I saw this when I was in middle school. So I was probably like 12 or 13. I watched it with my dad, but it was a movie he really liked, and decided he wanted to watch it with me. And of course I loved it uh, instantly. But it led me to end up seeing, the Godfather films, and several other. And Untouchables is definitely not like in the same vein as those movies, but it is very much part of that genre too, because it's very much from the law enforcement side of things. But it was kind of the gateway for me into those kind of films, and I still hold it in very high regard in that respect. But Sean, just talking about Sean, and it just he has such a great role, and it's one of his best performances, I think. And I have not seen it in years, so this is going to be great to kind of go back and visit it again.
It's definitely one of his best performances. But we talked about this when we talked about Never Say Never Again, how one of his conditions was that he got to play a role in casting everybody else in the movie, because he, in Never Say Never Again, because he thought that was one of the weaker points of the Bond movies he had made, was some of the cast choices. And it's hard to argue with the cast of Never Say Never Again.
Right.
But the reason I bring that up is because it just seems so particular in defining what Connery found important.
Yeah.
And he really was a true actor, and he wasn't just wanting to collect the biggest paycheck or just be in the biggest movie. He was interested in making good stuff, and he cared about his fellow actors.
Right.
And he was a real actor, but he was also like a leading man kind of guy. But that some people can, I think, not define well what acting is, and
Yeah.
specifically like when it comes to Like you see a character actor and they disappear into all different kinds of roles, and that can be amazing and incredible, and I love that too. But that's not the only type of personality that exists.
Right.
And I like a good just leading actor kind of person as well.
Yeah.
And Connery was always Sean Connery in a certain sense, but he was definitely also an actor. And there's definition in his characters, and you can see different things going on beneath, beneath their different personalities.
Exactly.
He was truly conveying emotion and conveying character in so many different rich ways. Easy to escape if you just look at caricature. Which, to be fair, like one of the first things I thought about was the Celebrity Jeopardy Sean Connery sketches, especially when Alex Trebek recently passed away, and all I could think about was those Celebrity Jeopardy sketches. And
You're sitting on a gold mine, Trebek.
I mean, it's kind of it's all obviously hilarious, but it's just like funny that like, oh, I legitimately appreciate both people, Alex Trebek and Sean Connery, for themselves, but all I can see is these caricatures, these SNL
Right.
versions of them that aren't actually them,
Right.
and how hilarious they were. But that being said, specifically like the movies we have on our plate for this episode, The Untouchables is one that as you referenced, I wrote about it extensively on my blog, and not that I won't find pleasure talking about it again, because I definitely will. It's an excellent movie, and one that I've seen a decent number of times. Uh, Great Train Robbery is one that I grew up with, and I've definitely seen it a number of times as well, although it's been longer since I've seen it. Michael Crichton, man, as a writer and a director, really good stuff, and I'm going to be excited to revisit that and reevaluate that because it's been so long since I've seen it. Again, I grew up with Connery, and that's another example of it. Is that movie? It's just I just remember it being a fun ride of a film, uh, and just like I remember Entrapment because of Catherine Zeta Jones slinking under lasers. That's it really is a funny thing. It's like that's what I remember. I think that's what most people remember because that was the marketing campaign. Can you think of anything in recent memory that had obviously plenty of movies live on the sex appeal?
Right.
Let's say Iron Man 2 being all about Scarlett Johansson fighting in a tight suit.
Right.
But even having said that, there was obviously a lot more that was being advertised. Entrapment was sold on Catherine Zeta Jones looking sexy and sticking her butt in the air.
Right.
I can't think of anything else like that.
I'm looking at the poster right now. It is just like the background is just Sean Connery's face.
Yeah.
Foreground is Catherine Zeta Jones in like a really tight suit with her hips sticking out and lasers. And the title of the film. I mean, that's it. That's the market. Like people were like, "Shut up and take my money." The the trailers were all about that too. But I remember it being a enjoyable film, but I really don't remember anything else other than that right now
I mean, I
though.
was a teenager when it came
Yeah,
out, and I haven't seen it since I was a teenager.
right.
So I guess that's another reason to reevaluate it in my 30s, is because like, not to say I can't appreciate Catherine Zeta-Jones in a tight suit, but I feel like teenage me might have had a slightly different appreciation for that movie. Kind of like if you read Roger Ebert reviews of any movie with Angelina Jolie, it's positive. I mean, it's just a funny thing because, like, I know because I read so many Roger Ebert reviews that he's a breast man, and he really likes Angelina Jolie in particular. there's not a movie that he didn't give a break to with her in it. That could be proven wrong. Maybe there's one movie out there or something that he gave a bad review to, but he really liked some Angelina Jolie. So that definitely exists, and he obviously wasn't writing those reviews as a teenage boy. So
Right. And maybe we will give Entrapment the most positive review that we've ever given any film.
it's
You know,
possible.
we'll give it a triple A plus, uh, and not have any backed up substance as to why.
I mean, what else do you need? You just described what you need. You need Catherine Zeta Jones in a tight
Just
suit,
yeah.
lasers, and Sean Connery.
I think it's funny that we've already referenced the lasers when talking about the lasers and Die Another Day. Um, like actual, just the lasers for detection. Like you trip one, you set it off an alarm. An entrapment versus lasers cutting through people. The hilarious. I don't want to talk about Die Another Day, but just the hilariousness that ensued in that. But we did make reference to Entrapment then, so it holds its own in the lasers department that we're still talking about it after all this time. But it'll be interesting to see what our thoughts are on it at because neither one of us really remember anything other than what we've discussed. I mean, again, what else do you need to remember? What else do you need? I mean, maybe our review will just be a still image of the poster,
Yeah.
and that's it. But I am excited to watch it again. I'm excited to see the Great Train Robbery. I'm a Michael Crichton. I think is very, he was a very popular author in his time. I think obviously some of his books are still very famous, notably Jurassic Park, mostly for the movie. But the books are very different, and he was very much a proponent of the movies being different from the books. But that's a completely different story. But he and Spielberg were friends. He was a film director as well. He understands what works as a film and what doesn't. But to see him kind of adapting his own novel with this again, and I haven't read his Great Train Robbery. I want to, but and then I will watch the movie first though. I am excited to see that, and just Sean Connery and Donald Sutherland. It just sounds fun.
Yeah.
It just sounds fun.
Right?
Uh,
Yeah.
um, I'm really excited to check it out. And again, and I don't want to go on too much further, but it's just this is one of those movies. Untouchables is just one of those movies. I know how I'm gonna feel about it when I watch it. It's just a question of how much more I'm gonna feel about it. It's a film I love every time I see it, and it probably gets a little bit better every time I see it. It's just a really well done film, and there's just so many great moments in it, but just particularly Sean's performance, and I don't want to spoil it for people that haven't seen it, but it is going to be kind of bittersweet to watch this one in the knowledge of his passing in real life. Now it's going to have like a particular sadness to it. Um, but I think when I think of Connery's best performances, this is easily on the short list. Um, I just really do love the Untouchables. It's one of the best of its kind, and everyone is just so great in it. But he especially is just fantastic. There's so many great lines he has, but it's not just one liners, just great dialogue. Uh, and you got David Mamet writing it.
Yeah.
Just some absolutely great dialogue he has. Great script. It's just a really good movie, and I've been dying to watch it anyway, because you and I will probably, I think our minds will be in the same place. There are certain elements of this film, of a particular character from history, that are kind of being echoed um, in our political atmosphere right now. Um, there were reasons I was already wanting to watch this movie again, but Sean's passing definitely um, pushed it up the notch, and I am really excited to watch it again.
And I've always been an FBI guy in many different ways, and just thinking about the story of Al Capone, the real story, and how you actually catch somebody like that.
Right.
It's just such a cool story, uh, real ways to catch criminals, real appreciation for that. But yeah, uh, it's going to be fun to revisit that movie. I'm also a king of unnecessary connections, and just happened to think about the fact that Brian de Palma, who is a filmmaker that I love, is also a huge Hitchcock guy and is
Right.
known for Hitchcock references,
Right.
among plenty of other things, and also very much has his own voice. He's not just the echo of Hitchcock, he has his own voice for sure. And it just so happens that Mr. Sean Connery, he was also in the Hitchcock movie Marnie
Yes.
in the same
Yeah.
time frame that he was first starting out as James Bond. See, I'm just randomly making this all full circle in this little conversation that we're having. And speaking of him as Bond as well, first the depiction on screen of a laser in Goldfinger. So,
See, it all makes sense.
right?
Die Another Day is now a masterpiece.
Thanks, Dad.
The laser, the lasers, it all makes sense now. No, but Marnie was actually something I was thinking about, maybe because we discussed doing a Sean episode the day that he passed, and
Yeah.
one of the ones I was thinking about watching was Marnie, because I have not seen it. Um, and I and I'm glad we chose the ones that we did. But that is one that's kind of on my list. That's been on my list for a while, because I've seen a lot of the. You're talking about the essentials. I've seen a lot of Hitchcock films, but I certainly haven't seen them all. And there's a few heavy hitters that I haven't seen, and
Right.
Marnie is one of them. And I do want to see it at some point.
Well, that's also that's a tricky thing about trying to narrow down a list for episodes, and we already have a plan for. Even before his passing, we had a plan for several of his movies.
Right.
So we wanted to do Indiana Jones, and not to tease too far ahead, but I definitely want to do our Nick Cage run at some point.
Right, right.
Um, different ways that Jack Ryan, well, there are different ways we'll definitely revisit Connery movies
Yeah.
at different points. I think this is going to be a good 3 movie run for this episode. An interesting array, and with the great capper at the end as well.
Right.
With the lasers and sexy Catherine Zeta Jones
Catherine.
and Sean Connery's face.
Yeah, hey.
I really wish I could remember one other thing about the movie.
It's really telling, and I'm not embarrassed or ashamed.
No.
Well, I'm just not. I'm not even gonna pretend. Um, but am I excited to watch it again? Yes.
Yes.
but no, I think we've chosen a good selection. And like I said, we definitely know one film that we're already on agreement on being really great, and it'll
And that
be
one's
interesting.
sandwiched right in the middle.
Yeah, so that'll be fun to go and check these films out.
Well, I guess, my friend, I'll see you on the other side where we'll start our conversation talking about the Great Train Robbery.
Sir, can you possibly explain why you went to such incredible lengths to commit this astounding crime?
I wanted the money.
The Great Train Robbery, starring Sean Connery, the greatest scoundrel hero who ever lived.
Do you ever tell anyone the truth?
The truth?
Who ever loved. Who ever lied.
Come, my dear fellow, are we not friends?
More than that, Henry. Much more.
How can I be of service to you?
Find me a dead cat.
The Great Train Robbery.
And here we are, other side of watching 3 Connery crime thrillers. And we start things off with the Great Train Robbery. This is a movie that I grew up with and always had an affection for. And one of the things that, obviously talking about Connery himself and how synonymous with my love of movies that he is, but Michael Crichton as well. And in 4th grade, I started like reading Goosebumps books so quickly that I'm like, I need to step it up. And I went to Michael Crichton books.
Yeah.
That was, I guess, quite a leap, but nonetheless, it was Goosebumps to Michael Crichton. And of course, Michael Crichton, probably most popularly known for Jurassic Park Connection.
Right.
Andromeda Strain being one of his best-selling books, and there's so many things that he was responsible for, but one that I always remembered and loved of his books was actually his autobiography, Travels, which is a really entertaining book. Surprise, surprise, Crichton wrote an entertaining book, but he's led an interesting life. He did have an interesting life, and he was
Right.
something that he and I share is a fear of needles. But what he did that I don't do is work in medicine. So that's kind of a bad thing that he wrote about in his book, was being scared of needles and it being important, or should have been important, for him to administer some injections or taking of blood and so forth. But it's a good book. But one of the parts that he wrote about was actually making this movie. And I always remembered a story he told about his hair catching on fire from the embers of the coal on the train.
Wow.
And this is one of those things where they always say that they don't make them like they used to. And they don't make them like the Great Train Robbery anymore, and they probably shouldn't.
Right.
It's a very different kind of they don't make them like they used to, because Sean Connery's running on top of a train
Yeah.
in this movie. Holy crap. And his wife hit him for doing that as well when she saw the movie. It's insane. Like, he's one of the biggest stars in the world by this point, like several years after he finished his official run as James Bond,
Right.
which were the biggest movies, and here he is running on top of a train. It's insane. If they let him do it, they wouldn't do that today. Like even Tom Cruise, known for doing some crazy stuff, he trains like crazy and does all types of safety precautions. And it's not to say that the stunts aren't dangerous, but there's all types of precautions that I don't think they had nearly in that capacity on this movie, which is just so wild. And even to the point of they were supposed to go 35 miles per hour on the train, which would already be a lot, honestly, running on top of a train going 35 miles per hour. But Connery said, Connery thought it was going faster. Turns out it was going 55. And they had a helicopter track it and said, "Oh yeah, it is going faster, by the way. You've been going 55 miles per hour on top of that train." So incredibly dangerous. It makes for some good shots, though.
Yeah.
This is one of those movies that's so just purely entertaining and purely the crime thriller, the heist movie. And that's, you don't need anything else to it. It's like, why would they do this heist? What's it matter? They're heisting it because it's gold.
Right.
That's all you really need. Who are they? Who cares? We need to get a team together. We're going to go heist this train. And it's awesome and fun. And I will say, like, just getting into a little bit of criticism is just that uh, the movie isn't, the perfect example of itself, I guess, in the sense that, for one thing, like, I love heist movies, and Ocean's 11 keeps jumping to my mind when I think about this movie. And Ocean's 11 isn't a deep movie either, but it also has just enough other stuff around the edges
Right.
that you get a sense of character, a sense of things, and at the same time, the movie's just a joy to watch and purely entertaining. But you get just that little bit of extra flavor, just that little bit of style. Steven Soderbergh, just going to say it, a better director than Michael Crichton. And I love Michael Crichton, and I don't even think he's a bad director, but he doesn't have that style, that panache, in quite the same way.
Right.
At some point, I think we need to talk about the Ocean's movies, all the way down to Logan Lucky as well. Throw in Ocean 7-11 as well, because that's Logan Lucky might be my favorite of the whole lot. Really fun, really good movie. But just that first Ocean's 11 movie that Soderbergh made with Clooney and Pitt and everybody else, I keep coming back to that one just because it's kind of the purest exercise of this type of heist movie. And the Great Train Robbery kind of walks that same type of line of just kind of having fun on the ride, trying to pull off this heist. But what it also does that not enough movies do is it's in the 19th century.
Yeah.
We need more heist movies like that in the 19th century. And I don't know, at one time I remember us talking about the Three Musketeers movie from one Paul W.S. Anderson. Did you ever see that movie?
I never did.
And I have, because I reviewed his movies on my blog for some stupid reason. And which was both a chore and it was also entertaining at times. When it wasn't taxing, it was also entertaining. And that movie is such a strange amalgam of things, and it's kind of actually good in a really crazy way. I almost hesitate to call it good, but it was kind of crazy good at times.
Right.
Just in a fun, weird, entertaining way. But obviously one of the things that it does is it's a period movie, but it's kind of that cyberpunk, like it has that what's the word I'm looking for? The
Like steampunk or
steampunk is the word I was searching
Gotcha.
for. Yep. It has that steampunk vibe that is fun, and I don't dislike it, but the it has its place for sure.
Right.
But there are also points where I'm like, why don't we have more things that are just like purely the period stuff and do the heist? Because there's this weird thing that Paul W.S. Anderson, for some reason, goes back to time and time again, especially in the Resident Evil movies, where, in the first Resident Evil, they have that laser hallway,
Yeah.
which for some reason eventually becomes a grid.
Right.
And it's like, why wasn't it always a grid? And then it's impossible to get through. Why is this intelligent laser system playing games with people? It's really stupid. But he actually does that type of sequence in the Three Musketeers with his wife, the Resident Evil star Mila Jovovich. He does the same type of thing, and you're like, what in the world is this doing in this movie? You're attempting to do some kind of hallway heist, I think, with cannonballs or stuff, is kind of crazy. But regardless of which, you have heist elements that made me think, like, I keep going back to that because the Great Train Robbery does something that I just don't think we see anywhere else. I can't think of another example of this type of trying to copy a key sort of stuff,
Right.
which is really fun to imagine the practicality of having to do that and the time that it would take to do that. They put just enough detail in there. Like, Michael Crichton is obviously a good writer, and he's known for a lot of jargon, usually like scientific jargon, but in the case of the Great Train Robbery, it's period detail. Down to the point that obviously there's a scene in this movie where they need to copy a key that the guy keeps always around his neck. And in the book, it's was a younger girl, I can't remember, like really young girl, maybe it's 14-year-old girl, which was the age of consent then. But if you imagine that scene playing that way in this movie, which they have the scene in the movie, but it's the main female of the story that is having to cohort with this disgusting character, and she doesn't want to be with, and for some reason has a replay when they're on the train.
Right.
That's another bit of criticism. Why does she have to be in the car with him on the train at that point? Like, I feel like that's an overextension of the movie's comedy
Right.
and
Yeah.
unnecessary stuff when we're already involved in him running across the top of the train and Donald Sutherland in the coffin, and
Right.
so much stuff is happening that's really good and fun. Why do we need her in the car with this guy, and the awkward sexuality of those scenes? But the earlier scene where she's seducing him in the bedroom was originally in the book like a 14-year-old girl, and you couldn't do that in a movie without drastically changing the tone of everything.
Right.
And it's weird because, like, I'm not advocating for that scene to be there, but I do think there's almost just a little bit too much lightheartedness in this story in a way where we could have pulled back just a little bit, added just a little bit more range and the depth of the characters and so forth, and it could have been just that much better. I feel like the tweaking involved to make this movie even better is relatively slim, but nonetheless, I do think this movie is a blast. I'm curious what you thought about it, since it's not something that you grew up with like me.
Right. I've been aware of it for I guess as long as I can remember, because
Yeah,
I didn't like read. I'm trying to think what I read first. It may have been Jurassic Park, but I go way back with Crichton too because of Jurassic Park. Because
sure.
I mean, obviously, as a child, it was one of my favorite movies, and I wanted to just know everything about it and watch the making of documentary when it came on NBC and the 90s and all these other things. And hearing Michael Crichton talk in the interviews and everything was cool. And my dad had read the book, had it, and I read it. So Crichton was on my radar, and I ended up reading a lot of his books. And not really important to anyone but me, but he and I shared the same birthday, so I always appreciated that fact as well. So I always really was fond of him. Had some great books. I really enjoy Eaters of the Dead, uh,
Yeah.
which is kind of his other semi historical fiction uh, slash fantasy and slash uh, Beowulf re-envision that became the 13th Warrior film. Uh, I love Congo, the book.
I'm
I
glad
have
you
to,
had to say the book. Yeah.
yeah, I had to clarify. And I've enjoyed other things, but to get to the point, Great Train Robbery is one that I have known about, and I've heard many good things about it, but I just have never gotten around to reading it. So I I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't too surprised at all to find that this is kind of just a charming. I think that's the best way to describe it, is kind of a charming heist adventure.
Yeah.
And who better, who better, to bring in the charm than Sean Connery. And I think your criticisms are the same as mine, because that's one thing I was going to bring up if you didn't, is that I thought that maybe it was just a little too lighthearted, a little too fun at times, when there are certain things that actually happen, like the subplot that you mentioned with the girl seducing Manda to get the key, his mistress Miriam. It's still him, like, whoring her out.
Yeah.
That's, it's still kind of sketchy. Yeah, and not that I think it reflects poorly on the movie, but I feel like it shouldn't just be shrugged off and laughed off at the same time either. And there's some a murder that takes place with a informant. Um, someone talking to the police, and gets them in trouble, and they meet their end. That's some darker stuff, and it's all kind of laughed, which it works the way it's done. But I also think there's an opportunity to give a little bit more depth to everything too. So, but all that aside, I think this is a blast. I like you. I really like the period piece element of it, and that kind of the the limits of what they had to pull this off, and the planning, but also, and I really like the way it was planned out, and I really like the genius of it, and him having to find a team and do everything. But I also think I really enjoy is kind of the little obstacles that happen, and he has to work around them.
Yeah.
And that was the most fun part of the movie for me, was those kind of things, and them having to do desperate things to get the keys made, the copies, and just all of that. And I mean, he has to pretend like he's interested in that girl, in that man's daughter, um, and pretend he's dating her at the beginning, which was just really funny anyway. But just those kind of things I really enjoyed. But yeah, the part that is on the train is just phenomenal, and the pacing. I love the music. Jerry Goldsmith made a very rousing uh, score for this. It's very, it's very him. I knew, you know, if I wouldn't have seen his name on the credits or looking it up before I watched, I would have known it was him. He has such a distinctive style. One of the greatest composers we've ever had, and I really enjoyed the music in this movie. But Connery on the train, I mean, what else could you say about it? It's so cool, and it's just such a fun bit. And as somebody who has been on trains and done things riding on the sides of trains, which was already dangerous in and of itself, I can concur with the. It's probably a really good thing that they don't make movies like that anymore, because that is insanely dangerous. And it's sad enough when we hear of people dying in the making of films, that it would not be worth it to film just something cool like that. But I am glad that Sean did it and did most of the stunts, and pulled it off. And I'm glad we have that as part of his legacy, and I'm glad I have this film kind of in my canon of what I'm gonna think of Sean Connery now.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed him in this, and like you said, there's not really too much under the surface, but that charm in the moment of this movie, when you need charm to really sell it, Sean Connery is going to pick it up
Absolutely.
and deliver it. That's the kind of movie star you need for this kind of movie, and he was the perfect choice. And I love Donald Sutherland in this too. He's just a lot of fun. Um, I think in a lot of ways, this is going to sound weird. In a lot of ways, I think he's an underrated actor, even though he is, rather famous himself. Um, but I really kind of enjoy the uh, the goofiness of him sometimes in some films, and that you might not be aware he could pull if you'd only seen him in certain types of films before, like people that are only familiar with him from the Hunger Games. I don't know if they would be prepared for him in this movie, or the Dirty Dozen, or anything he did in the past. But I just I I just really enjoy the cast of this movie, but especially these two, and I do enjoy uh, the girl that plays Miriam, but I did also kind of roll my eyes at the whole bit with her in the passenger car with that guy at the end, and like it didn't really feel needed, and it was just like kind of cringy, honestly. But it was, I mean, not in a way that's like too bad, not too bad, but just kind of like, do we really need this? And not in a tonal way, but just kind of like, okay, we like you said, it's extension. We didn't really overextension. We didn't need to reprise that scene, um, really. But overall, this is just a fun movie, and I'm kind of sad I hadn't seen it before now, but I will watch it again. I pretty much can guarantee that, because I would definitely put this up on some of his better films. Maybe not his absolute best, but this is definitely, it's fun to see Sean in this kind of role that's just a blast, and that he's sinking his teeth into, and he's really delivering on the charm, but it's not James Bond. And it's like, a similar vein of the fun in it, but it's not, um, just James Bond all over again. It's nothing like that. And it's fun to see him in that kind of position and role in this. So I would give this one an A. I just really enjoyed it. And I do agree about Michael Crichton. Like, I think maybe an even more skilled director and maybe just a little, like you said, those little tweaks could have made this even better. But I really did enjoy this, and it was a blast. I'm glad we lined this one up because it's one I had wanted to see for a long time, but I don't even know if I would have gotten around to seeing it if we didn't do this. So it's kind of a fun little treat.
A good excuse sometimes is necessary to check out things that we've let slide for one reason or another. I was happy to return to this movie for the first time, and I'm not sure how long. I've definitely seen it a number of times, but yeah, very just purely fun movie. How about that image when they first open up the coffin and you see Donald Sutherland in there?
Right.
It's so funny. Definitely one of those memorable images that keeps coming back from this movie, and him training to have the perfect timing to get that one key with the security guard that always goes to the restroom the same time,
Right, right.
the same amount of time every night. That's pretty crazy. But people can be very intense in their routines sometimes. That's not altogether untrue. I've definitely known people in my life that had very strict routines like that.
Right.
Even if you're watching it expecting it to somehow be an extra kink in the plan in terms of that guy's timing, but of all the things that happen, that guy, a security guard, is the same time, even when they need it to be the same time.
Right.
Johnny on the spot, like the same. Oh, time to go to the bathroom for the same exact amount of time. It's pretty wild. I would ultimately probably settle on an A minus. So like it's a really fun movie. I don't have hardly anything bad to say about it. Really, you know what I mean? Like there's
Right.
nothing really that's bad about the movie. It's just so fun and so good and has so many little details that make it work, that make it enjoyable. But I do think it could have used just that little bit more kick. I don't mean to keep bringing up Ocean's 11, but there's that line of dialogue that I've always loved in that movie. One of the most memorable bits from that movie where Clooney and Joy Roberts are talking, and he asks her, "Does he make you laugh?" And she says, "He doesn't make me cry." And it's just enough in that one little bit of dialogue where you understand their past relationship and history and the connection they have and what she's looking for, and kind of some dramatic stakes. Even though the movie, for the most part, is just straight fun, it has just that little bit of heft. Um, it's the sort of thing, maybe not precisely that thing, that we could have had in this movie, like some element of understanding the danger or understanding the stakes at play. Could have had just that little bit extra in there and it would have pushed it over the top. I have a feeling that Crichton, the filmmaker, was trying to appease the mass market kind of sensibilities, maybe to lighten it just a little bit more
Right.
compared to what he might do in a book. He certainly was always aware of movies and how they could work and how they could work with his books. But if you read his books, they tended to have even more edge to them
Yeah.
or range to them than he has in this particular movie. But it's still such a blast, such a fun movie. It's not like I'm gonna trash the Great Train Robbery, which was called the first Great Train Robbery in the UK because they actually had a contemporaneous train robbery that the media was calling the Great Train Robbery. So like we better call this something different. So the first Great Train Robbery, so the people wouldn't think it was about the
what
current
did
day.
happen. Gotcha.
Yeah. And hey, you're not going to go much further back than 1850s to
Right.
it's the first Great Train Robbery. Yeah, the fun movie. And speaking of having a little bit more edge or range, the next movie up is The Untouchables.
I grew up in a tough neighborhood. Sometimes a reputation follows you.
Robert De Niro is Al Capone.
There is violence in Chicago, of course, but not by me and not by anybody I employ, and I'll tell you why, because it's not good business.
Kevin Costner is Elliot Ness.
I have sworn to put this man away with any and all legal means at my disposal, and I will do so.
Sean Connery is Jimmy Malone.
You want to get Capone? Here's how you get him. He pulls a knife, you pull a gun. He sends one of yours to the hospital, you send one of his to the morgue. That's the Chicago way.
You fellas are untouchable. Is that the thing? No one can get to you? Hey, everybody can be gotten to.
Definitely a movie that I think we've both seen a number of times.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, and grown up with in some capacity. That something that I've thought a lot about in recent memory, recent history with myself, is how much I really love the FBI, for instance, which this they don't I don't know if they I don't think they ever explicitly say FBI in the Untouchables, but
Right.
this prohibition copying was part of the FBI in the same time frame, going after Al Capone. And I don't know, there's just something about the FBI. Obviously, it kind of maybe starts with the X-Files for me and loving the FBI, but it even extends beyond that. I've always been interested in even further details than some might be interested in. Like I read the entire Mueller report when it came out. It's like, oh, I must read this entire thing. And I love reading like Supreme Court opinions. I just find that kind of detail interesting. There's a podcast, Undisclosed, where it's three lawyers that are doing the podcast, and they go into really deep detail on like the wrongful conviction cases.
Right.
That they actually work on as well. So they actually end up trying to get these people out of prison, but they go into really intricate detail into these cases. And some people might find that sort of thing boring, and I'm like, no, I love this. I love thinking about the way that you would help somebody get out of prison, or
Right.
the way you would go about trying to stop a crime boss. James Comey has taken down a number of crime bosses, and I love reading his book, A Higher Loyalty. And one of the things that happens in A Higher Loyalty, he writes about, I believe it was his first job, but a job early in his life where he worked at a grocery store. And it's like, oh, you can tell this is a Boy Scout that wrote this book, because he's
Right.
writing about the lessons he got from a boss when he worked in a grocery store. And meanwhile, he's led an interesting life that involves taking down gangsters. But now he's writing a book that partially involves this grocery store. And it's like, boy, you're straight laced, aren't you? In a way that I personally admire and think a lot of. But when I think about the Untouchables, obviously, like Kevin Costner's character is that kind of straight laced hero. Ends up going for somebody like Sean Connery to help him out a little bit. What are you willing to do? Maybe worth getting a little dirty, or maybe having to get a little dirty. There's some of that conversation in the Untouchables about what you might have to do to take down somebody as notorious as Al Capone.
Yeah.
But that's a fascinating theme when you think about how obvious it was that this guy was awful. Like, Like you could just look at him and be like, how can just take him down? How come you can't just take him down? Everybody knows what he's capable of and what he's doing, but for some reason there are people that are caught in his spell, that he has some type of charm or what have you that can pull people under his sway. And even in spite of how obviously corrupt he is and responsible for terrible things he might be, uh, still hard to take him down. You have to find the right legal way of doing it. I find that road kind of fascinating in and of itself. But I will say that, and I've written about the Untouchables before because I love Brian De Palma to pieces, and reviewed his filmography. And with this movie in particular, it's so awash in this classical style that is distinctly De Palma, but it's also different than a lot of other things he's done.
Yeah.
It has that callback to like Battleship Potemkin with the staircase sequence.
Yeah.
That's like an awesome sequence in and of itself for the Untouchables, and then it's calling back to classic cinema. Everything about this movie has De Palma's kind of edge and style and flair, but it's a callback movie as well. And so much of it is like, let's get on the horses and rally the troops kind of vibe. Something that's harkening backward and in a way almost lacking some of what De Palma might be known for at times, in terms of uh, the edginess that he could be capable of.
Right.
It's like this is the straight laced movie, and it kind of needs to be. If I have any criticism for this movie, and it is slight, but it's where I kind of come back on this movie, is I feel like they don't maybe do enough with some of the ideas, what you're willing to do or not to do. That moral debate. I feel like there could have been just a little bit more. The movie is so awash in its style that, like, that moment that Costner kicks that guy off the roof, it's like, oh wow, but what? Like I want to deal with that a little bit more. Like I totally get it from a revenge movie kind of perspective, but this isn't really. It is and it isn't a revenge movie, I guess you could say, because obviously there's the entire motive starts with the killing of a little girl.
Right.
So there's every reason for them to want to pursue this, and then it gets more personal. That revenge aspect, nonetheless, doesn't change what I feel like the movie doesn't quite do enough with in terms of substance, even while it's busy being awash with style. I think it could have done just a hair bit more, and that's the slightest criticism, but that's where I kind of stand on this movie, as much as I absolutely love it.
I I have the distinct history of this movie kind of being really like my introduction to the organized crime gangster genre of film, and um, obviously it is from the law enforcement perspective, so it's it's very atypical to most of those kinds of movies in just in that fact, and it's kind of black and white take on that too. um, One of a movie that I love, that I think is kind of, you could put this on the opposite end of the spectrum. They're the same kinds of movies, but as far as like, you have your cop and you have, your criminal, and the chase between the two is Heat. It's a very different. This one is very much a not in a negative way at all, but melodramatic, very, very, hard on its sleeve, classic, almost like the 30s, 40s themselves, kind of the nostalgia of looking back to that time. As you say, this is a very much a callback type of movie. Throwback to, even like the spirit of the 50s when, the Untouchable show, TV show was on. And Heat is very much, looks at it from both sides, and there's, good and bad in both people, completely different kinds of movies. And I love both of them, and I think they're both, great examples of how to do this, being very different. But I just love this movie. I knew I did, and I kind of every time I go back and watch it, it's just I like it even more. And this time was no exception. And it's a little. I think this is the first time I've watched it since Ennio Morricone died.
Yeah.
Uh, and of course Sean passing away now too. For some reason made this hit a little harder in some ways. The music is so good in this. It's one of my favorite things about it. I think it's one of Ennio Morricone's best scores, and it's I just love the music in it. Um, I do love Sean in this, and I love his character, and I do like that he is kind of, that voice of no nonsense for Elliot Ness to kind of realize that he can't just beat Capone with a badge, that you have to play their game. And I think I do agree with you about, I do think that it could have been handled a little bit better because, we have the point where he ends up killing that guy in the first, first off, let's just talk about that scene on the bridge
Yeah.
where they end up going to, take out that shipment. And, you have uh, Charles Martin Smith as Wallace, who I really, really enjoy in this movie, even though he's not in it for too long. Um, and of course, Andy Garcia as George Stone. But you have the whole crew together, and just them going out on that real first event. They had done a bust up once, but this was the big thing that they pulled off. And I just love the way it's shot. I love that shot of the Mounties, like when they're coming down the bridge, and it's just a really well done sequence. I love that whole bit. But when he's chased the guy back to the cabin, and he's got him pinned, and he goes for the gun, and he has to kill him, and he's obviously kind of broken because he didn't, he had never done it before. I like that part of Ness's character. I like seeing that a little bit more. Connery's just kind of like, well, it was you or him, and, enjoy some sleep tonight. Kind of tells him to shrug it off because he's been there. He knows that you can't get, bogged down in thinking about things like that. And when you want to do the right thing, but I still like that Ness struggles with it. He doesn't really struggle with it when he throws Frank Nitti off that building at the end, which is an awesome and fun scene. And I can't bring it down too bad, but it does kind of feel just a little. I feel like the staircase sequence is a much better representation of Ness, and also kind of getting revenge at the
Yeah.
same time. Where the guy he punched when he goes after Capone, and I know we're kind of just jumping all over scenes here, but he ends up seeing him, and that's what provokes him to just, pull that shotgun out, um, and get that whole bloody mess rolling.
And how about that moment with just Garcia holds his foot holding the carriage and he has
Oh,
the shot, you
that
got it, you know? Bang. That's
yeah,
so great.
it's it, it's one of my favorite sequences of all time, and I have never seen Battleship Potemkin all in its entirety, but I've seen the sequence just because of this movie, and it's really cool that De Palma is such a fan of film that because I don't think that's a ripoff; it's a homage, and he does something unique with it.
And De Palma's no stranger to homage.
Yeah, not at all. And and I love that, and I love his love of film, and I love that that flavor here. Um, but I just feel like that's kind of a better representation of kind of hitting back at Capone um, than what happens at the trial. But also, it's also a very satisfying scene as well in terms of just instant gratification that you're mad that Malone got taken out by Nitty and Ness gets the revenge it's a crowd pleasing thing.
And it's so cool and stylishly delivered too, like it's just impossible not to
Yeah.
get swept up in it.
Right. Exactly. I when this movie chooses to, you were talking about the edge that De Palma can be known for, and even just talking about like say his other crime dramas he's done. Just a few years earlier, he did Scarface. It might have a little edge on that. One of the a movie that I've had a weird history with in and of itself. I won't get into it too much other than say I kind of started out hating it, and I appreciate it now for what it is. I like it, but I wouldn't call it one of my favorite movies or anything, but I respect it. I like it a lot more than I used to, but it's definitely a very extremely violent movie. um, a lot of people try to say that it's really only violent at the end, but okay, yeah, there's there's a whole lot in and and just the kind of nihilistic edge to it as well. Where
Well, it's definitely violent
yeah,
throughout,
right,
like the chainsaw.
yeah,
Like,
that's the scene I immediately go back to, and then there's the shootout in the club. There's
yeah.
what happens with uh, the aftermath of that when they execute Frank. Uh, there's a lot of violence in Scarface, but uh, I do think that Untouchables, some people might be like, "Oh, it's not as cool as that because it's not as violent." It does show edge from time to time. I remember being shocked the first time I saw it, and Wallace was killed uh, with the bookkeeper in the elevator, and the way that scene plays out still hits me with touchable written in blood on the elevator. That's an iconic image to me. And it just the acting too, like everybody's reaction to it. I it hits home and it doesn't get brushed off. It's not like, oh, we're gonna keep going. When this movie hits, it hits. And I feel like, you can see the Malone death coming a little bit more, but it doesn't make it any less touching. And when he gets taken out, I'm like, are you prepared? That's why the
Yeah.
what are you prepared to do? That's why the I feel like I feel like maybe the Frank Nitti stuff could have been left out, and you know, the staircase should have been the, you know, the action finale that it is. We still need the trial of Capone, but because I feel like that was the answer to his question, his final words. You know, what are you prepared to do? And it's, you know, it's, he gets his hands dirty, but it's not out of character. He's still, you know, um, it's like it's a perfect you know, description of Ness's character, of him simultaneously trying to save a child or take care of a child and also take out Capone's men. It's the perfect kind of, you know, metaphor for him, um, because that's kind of how he's living his life, like being good and trying to do this for people like that little girl that got killed at the beginning, and her mom, um, and comes to visit him, which is another scene that is just really moving, and a lot of it has to do with the music. But just in and of itself, the scene itself plays so beautifully. Um, I don't know. This is just a touching. I mean, pun intended. It's a touching movie, and it does. You know, I admit to kind of tearing up a few times this last watch. Um, it's a very emotionally satisfying movie. And I think, you know, there are, I'm not going to mention his name, but there are certain parallels between Capone and a certain political figure, and other people as well. It's just a kind of, you know, these corrupt figures that get in these positions, and they're so dug in with other political figures that they have in their pocket. There's just no way to get rid of them, and it's unfair. And I haven't even mentioned De Niro, uh, so I got to talk about him now. I used to think this was not one of his better performances, because this is where I've kind of turned on this movie a little bit, because I've always liked it, but I've actually liked this aspect more as I've gotten older, because I always thought he was just kind of too over the top and kind of too ridiculous as Capone, in his delivery. That was almost parody, or at least I thought that when I was younger, like a teenager. And you know, around the time that Rocky and Bullwinkle came out and he was in that, you know, it's like, oh, he does this kind of stuff in Untouchables too. And I was foolish, you know, but just that was the Robert De Niro that was out at the time. I really do like that they kind of made him that over the top kind of villain, because that's what this movie needs. It doesn't need to kind of sympathetic Al Capone. You need the villain Al Capone, and he does such a good job playing him. You know, I don't know if I would put this up with some of De Niro's best performances, but it's really good, and I really enjoy him in it. And you know, he's kind of buffoonish, but Capone was kind of buffoonish. So I think it's fitting.
I think it's exactly what it needed to be for this movie.
Right.
It is really the thing, you know, and it's not at the forefront, and it shouldn't be, because this is the good guy show.
Yeah.
This is the show where your heroes get on horseback and go, yeah, and go to save the day. You know, it's got that kind of spirit to it. And in that spirit, Kevin Costner is awesome.
Right.
He's one of our first rate stars. I almost said movie stars, but he's currently on the biggest show on television,
Yeah. Yeah.
Yellowstone, which I have
Same
yet to
here.
see. But the guy, he just doesn't stop being a major figure in some way. Him and Connery are interesting in the sense of both being big stars that maybe don't always get the credit they deserve for being the great leading men that they are, or haven't always gotten the credit maybe they deserve.
Right.
Easy to potentially overlook them a little bit. But they're both terrific in this movie, to say the least.
Right.
There's a reason that Sean Connery won the Oscar for this movie.
Yeah.
He's just first rate. Just the same as it's also worth mentioning that Ennio Morricone did not win his Oscar, but he was nominated for this movie and didn't win until just a few years
Hateful
ago.
Eight.
The Hateful Eight.
Yeah.
It's so crazy. One of the all-time greats, and this is one of his best scores. Such a classic, cool movie. I feel weird in a way. Like, I mean, it's kind of like when we were talking about Jaws. I give this movie a solid A grade personally, and it's not because it's a bad movie. I love it, and I'll return to it again at some point, I'm sure, because it's just such a solid movie with so much positive in it. But my reason for pushing it down just that notch is exactly what I said before. That slight style over substance.
Right.
It's not tremendously so. And De Palma's speaking of things, De Palma's no stranger to. He's no stranger to being called out for style over substance. But I don't think that's always fair to him. Scarface is definitely the lesser movie,
Right.
of these two. And I don't hate Scarface, but I'm maybe in a way similar to you. I don't put it on a high pedestal either. It's like, oh yeah, it's got stuff in it that's terrific, but it's not a great movie. It's a very conflicted movie.
Right.
Interestingly, another movie that had callback possibilities, but didn't really go that route. It went the more extreme, over the top route.
Yeah.
For what it's worth. The bad thing is my brain's trying to stop from talking about De Palma in general, because he's one of my favorite filmmakers.
Right.
Made so many terrific movies, but this one I'd give a solid A grade too.
I give it an A plus in it, and I think it's, you know, I guess I'm a little forgiving of the criticism I have, just because, and it might be nostalgia. I don't think it is, but it has that strong emotional hold on me that not everything does. So for that strong little bit added to it, I kind of give it the edge on an A plus. But I want to point one thing out that probably should bring it down a grade. Do you realize who the district attorney was played by?
Now I'm trying to rack my brain here.
It was none other than Sheriff W. Pepper from Live and Let Die, and
Oh my word!
Man with the Golden Gun, Clifton James.
I didn't catch that. Yeah.
I've been holding on to this nugget for when we finally record, because we've actually delayed. We watched these a few weeks ago, and actually kind of got delayed a little bit because of life, but I've been holding on to this nugget of information, seeing if you would know it, realize it. But for anybody who's listened to our reviews, and especially our Bond reviews on Movie Marathon Mood, Clifton James was definitely not one of our favorite parts of the Bond saga as a whole. But like I said, you can't even tell it's him. So we'll give him a pass. But yeah, I really enjoyed Untouchables. He's good in this movie, by the way. I don't hate the actor, just that character was so bad in Bond, so bad that we had to see it twice. But I digress.
No, that's I almost wish I'd caught. Now I almost had to watch Untouchables again just to shake my head at Sheriff Pepper. That's great. And obviously, like, I don't need to really do too much more discussion on A versus A pluses. Sometimes it's just it can be a funny gambit. uh Untouchables is a great movie. We both agree that it's a great movie.
Right.
My slight uh notch back is not a tremendous notch back. It's just
No, not at all.
A grades are great movies,
Right.
uh, by every stretch of the imagination. Untouchables is one of those class act movies. And speaking of class acts, A triple plus Entrapment.
That's right. The
Um,
greatest film of all time. That is so good.
Open the door.
He is the ultimate thief.
This is classic Mac.
This was 70 stories up with smart glass windows at 400 pounds a pop.
He's the best.
The law can't catch him.
We sent a couple of guys after him, and these were both good agents.
They were both men.
But she has a plan.
What do you have in mind for bait?
For the perfect trap.
Why are you following me?
I've got a proposition for you. I'm a thief. I give you the world's tallest building and home of the International Clearance Bank. Do I have your attention now?
Undivided.
You're keeping it strictly business, right, Mac?
Strictly. This is how it has to be. First we try.
Then we trust.
Has there ever been anyone you couldn't seduce?
Did he take the bait?
Big time.
You changed partners. You changed the rules.
Prepare to go offline.
35 seconds.
Weren't we partners?
You're playing both sides.
This is called entrapment.
No, actually, it's called blackmail. Entrapment is what cops do to thieves. You coming?
It's time to take your girlfriend out of the equation.
Shut it down.
Move it!
I promise you'll have it all.
This is big enough now.
It's never big enough.
I mean, how could it not be when you have Catherine Zeta Jones slinking underneath lasers and a tight outfit,
Yeah.
or having her. Here's what you need to know about this movie. There's actually a trivia note about the fact that she was actually fully nude under the covers when Sean Connery's sitting by the bedside.
Why would she?
And it's like they felt the need to actually point it out, like she was actually nude. And it's like, what is, how is that an interesting trivia note? I mean, not only is it not really an interesting trivia note to me, but it's also questionable when you think, does that help them all get into character more? Like, I'm not 100% sure why that's necessary or relevant, but I guess that's where we are. My brain just went in a slight tangent for a second thinking about Alien Resurrection, because there's on the behind the scenes of that movie, they go on a whole riff about how Sigourney Weaver really did sink that shot backwards. And she throws a basketball over her shoulder, and it went straight in. And that's a whole bit on the behind the scenes where they're like, she really did that for real in the first take, and we had to cut it before Ron Perlman lost his mind. And it's like, why is this the most significant part of your behind the scenes coverage of Alien Resurrection? But I want to point out right now that Entrapment is nowhere near the level of Alien Resurrection,
No.
Which is one of my least favorite movies of all time. Entrapment is not even a bad movie. It's just, it is pretty purely what it is.
Yeah.
I love that I had to watch the original trailer as well, because when you pointed out the poster for the movie and how the poster is exactly all you remember
Right.
about the movie. It's all that matters about the movie. It's Catherine Zeta Jones looking, sexy and sleek.
Yeah.
It's Sean Connery's face, and it's lasers.
Right. That's all you need.
Like, yeah, that's the movie.
That's it.
That really is like that. That's, I mean, essentially sells the movie. One of the things that I love about this movie too, genuinely, is the fact that Sean Connery, it was originally going to be a much bigger movie with bigger action, and Sean Connery said it shouldn't be. He wanted it to be dialed back and not be so explosive and not have as crazy at action,
Yeah.
He wanted it to be a little bit more personal, be a little bit more quiet, and I think that's 100% the right gear the movie needed. And Connery was smart about that stuff, and this was, kind of his last time as that type of leading man in terms of having the type of creative pull as well. Because he had essentially two other movies after this movie, Finding Forrester and The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which we already discussed how League of Extraordinary Gentlemen was the weird closer to his career.
Right.
And how that played out. And Finding Forrester, I've actually never seen it, but it's obviously a different kind of a movie in terms of being a more dramatic kind of film rather than, obviously it's somewhat relying on his star power, but it's a different kind of thing than what you have with Entrapment and the kind of movie star pull that he often had.
Right.
The charming, roguish action lead. And he did actually say in Entrapment he didn't want it to be The Rock, which isn't a slight against The Rock. He just thought it didn't. That's not what this movie was.
Right.
But I will say, for all the crap that you could give Michael Bay, that generally speaking could be deserved as well at different times. That might be one of the weaker aspects of this movie is the direction.
Yeah.
It probably could have used somebody with a little more panache. And I didn't exactly trash Michael Crichton earlier as a director.
No.
Just said he wasn't Soderbergh,
right,
which is a different animal. But I will say that Crichton did a better job directing Great Train Robbery than John Emile directs this movie.
Yeah.
One of the things that kind of kills me about this movie a little bit is the fact that it kind of doesn't have a consistent tone.
No.
It doesn't really know what it is to some degree. It's a fun movie, but it kind of doesn't want to be just fun. It wants to also be serious. It kind of also wants to be the romantic thing, but it's also not, and it's contradicting itself constantly. It's kind of odd how often it keeps undercutting itself almost.
Yeah.
And what's really weird too, I'm a big fan of Catherine Zeta Jones. She's one of my least favorite parts of this movie.
Yeah.
Because she's a capable actress. And around the same time, she was, of course, in Mask of Zorro.
Yep.
Where she's terrific in a similar kind of capacity, different but similar kind of capacity.
Right.
And obviously she's done even more range in other things, but if she's going to be the sex object in a movie, Mask of Zorro, I guess, a better example because she actually gets to play a character too, on top of on top of being that kind of thing. in this movie, in Entrapment, she's clearly like the drive is just that she's the sex object,
Right.
basically. Even though, but she's the lead of the movie.
Yeah.
It's supposed to be her story, but I have no idea what we're supposed to think of her because of the way it's written and the way that character doesn't really make any sense when you're watching her, and like I it's kind of bizarre
Yeah.
to me, not knowing who she is at all, because mostly all she's doing is pouting while everybody else seems to be ahead of her, and that's most of the movie.
Yeah.
uh, and I don't really understand that dynamic, but I guess you're not supposed to care. I think you're supposed to just want to see her butt sticking up in the air as she's going underneath the laser, and uh, not worry about the age difference between Connery and her.
Yep.
And I guess supposed to also feel that sexual tension that isn't really there. I guess like it's a strange thing. Connery's a captivating performer and a charismatic figure. I think he's good in this movie.
Yeah.
Uh, he knows how to do his thing, man. He knows how to be that charismatic leading performer. I'm not going to say his character makes any sense either, really, but he is charismatic, and he kind of carries you through a lot of it. Even when you have a Bing Rames there on a sideline, also having his own weird character turns,
Right.
where you're like, oh, I guess this isn't Mission Impossible. But what is it? Like the movie's doing too many things and not being consistent enough in any of them to really completely work. And all that being said, I'm not trying to even say it's a terrible movie, because most of the time, I found it enjoyable, but it's also confusing and conflicting.
Yeah.
So A triple plus, right?
Yeah, that's right. Um, I agree with you. I think this is a B, maybe B minus. I'll give it a B. I'll give it a little bit of just a little bit of credit, I guess, but not to say B minus would be that much worse. Again, B's pretty good. But I'm with you. Like, she's really a bad protagonist in this. It's really bad to have it from her viewpoint when she doesn't really have a consistent thread going. That she's always like 10 paces behind everybody else. That doesn't really, for a good story, make. But I do, and I feel like another thing this suffers from is that there was a similar movie with a similar, not the exact same plot, but a similar setup with, an art insurance with an art thief, called the Thomas Crown Affair, that came out the same year. That was much better.
Imagine that.
That featured another actor that played James Bond, and was directed by someone that actually has at some points in his career directed some, grade A action and adventure type films, and that's John McTiernan. Um, and that was one of his last great good movies. But when you see what that film is, and see what Entrapment is, I think there's a huge difference in quality. And again, I think the big problem here is, part of it's the screenplay, because I feel like the way it's set up, the way the story goes, and the way that we're being told things from her, with her as the main character, but yet she's also just kind of nothing more but a pretty face, which, is a shame to say because I really like Catherine Zeta Jones, and not just for the reasons we talked about in the intro. I really do. I really do like her. I loved her in Mask of Zorro. That was a film, again, talking about a former James Bond director, Martin Campbell. It's a greatly directed film where she is, kind of eye candy to an extent, but she does play an emotional role and she does play a character. And there is, an arc for her in that film. And she's good in it. I enjoy her in The Phantom, which was kind of like her first, big gig where she kind of plays just kind of a female sky pirate and in that kind of classic serial adventure type movie. I love The Phantom.
And how about Steven Soderbergh, Traffic? And
Yeah,
that movie's really
yeah,
terrific, and she's great in
yeah.
it too. So
So this isn't her fault. It's not. And again, the stuff we're supposed to know, to remember this movie for, I'm gonna remember those things. But uh, there needs to be more. There needs to be more to it. Now, I did like kind of. I want to say like I did enjoy the chemistry in some ways between her and Connery, but I almost think Connery could have chemistry with like a roll of toilet paper. He's that charming. And like again, that's not to say that Catherine Zeta Jones isn't, but it's just the character and the thing like with her just being so out of whack the whole film, and like when she finally kind of starts figuring out what's going on, something else like happens and she's just kind of left behind a lot, and it's just a weird place to be. And is it a romance, is it not? It goes back and forth here and there. But thank God somebody got on IMDb to confirm she was naked under the sheets, because that's the important trivia that this movie needed. Um, no, I enjoy. I mean, this cast. There's some great actors in it. Besides those two, like you said, Ving Rhames and Will Patton. I mean, right there, I love Will Patton. I think
yeah,
he's a really cool actor. He's I like his voice. He reads a lot of Stephen King audiobooks too. Um,
yeah.
and I just really like him. But again, like I don't know. I did think that some of the action in this was like enjoyable, and that especially kind of toward the end, I was really enjoying it. But again, I think like, what if somebody that I don't know if I'd go all the way with Michael Bay. Who knows? Maybe. But someone back then with that kind of flair would have helped, I think, kind of put this together. And I do think that it's cool that Connery asked him to, scale it back. And in some ways they did, but in some ways I think this also sometimes tries to feel like it's trying to be a Bond movie.
Well, you know what's interesting too is if you look at like cinematography. I'm not sure how you pronounce his name, but Phil Mayhew. The cinematographer also did Casino Royale and Goldeneye.
Aha.
Yeah, and Terry Rowlands, the
Yeah.
editor.
Yeah, I was just about to say Terry. Yeah.
He was also editor of GoldenEye, as well as Alien and Blade Runner. So he worked with
Blade Runner.
Ridley
Yeah.
Scott on those. Like these are people that know what they're doing, and are
Yeah.
capable of having
He-
these types of moments that capture you, good action and captivating kind of stuff, or good pacing as far as the editing is concerned, and keeping you with the action.
Let's just bring this full stream on our whole conversation and our whole thing. Terry Rollins also did The Musketeer. Um, and then his last film was Schumacher's Phantom of the Opera. So,
Yeah.
just kind of a tidbit. But yeah, no, so they had people that knew what they were doing for sure. Um, in the crew.
But just no guiding vision.
Exactly. And other than other than what's on the poster. and on the trailer. And again, like, you can't even say this is style over substance because, like, I'm not even sure what the style is because it's kind of all over the place. I mean, I know it's part heist movie, it's part like almost, world hopping spy adventure in a way. It's not technically spy, but uh that kind of Bond vibe. And I don't know if those two things really go to work together well for this. I almost wish that it was done just a little bit differently with someone who had like a better vision of it. But still, that's an A triple plus for me. On this masterpiece of film. But no, I think this is. I had fun watching this. I did. I definitely didn't dislike it. I enjoyed it, but I do think it's a little bit all over the place, and you know, just a little bit more vision than than Catherine Zeta Jones' body would have pushed this maybe over the edge. Maybe it would have been really good if they had kind of pieced it together and made her a better character and um, kind of had a tighter plot and everything instead of a tighter suit for her. I'm just gonna keep making jokes, um, but no, I did enjoy this, and I had not seen. I honestly don't know if I've seen it or not before this. I think I may have, but I just was hypnotized by the poster and the trailer and everything else that I can't remember anything but that. I
But
think I
that.
may have, but yeah, but that. So, um, but now I know, thanks to you, that she was naked under the sheets, and so now I have an additional thing that I'm going to remember about this movie. I'll forget that I watched it for this, but thankfully we'll have this episode to remind me. But no, I did enjoy it. I just, I think that it could have been a lot better, and it is kind of sad that you put it like that. That those are like his last. I've seen Finding Forrester. I'm not really that crazy about it. It's okay. It's all right. But like his last few films, this is probably the best one of that bunch, easily. Um, but it's kind of sad because someone on his caliber that that we like so much that you want to see them kind of, especially when he walked away. He retired. He didn't, he wasn't acting when he died, so he'd done everything he wanted to do in the film industry. And when someone leaves like that, you want to see kind of their last few things they did kind of be high notes. And this is not what we got with Connery, but that doesn't change his legacy as an actor, though. And I do think he was good in this. I mean, there aren't very many things I can even go, well, he was bad in this. Like even League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, he's Sean Connery. He does everything he can. He's one of the most charming actors I've ever seen, if not the most charming. I don't honestly know if I can think of too many that can even come close. It was fun watching all three of these to see, and it was different eras too, in the 70s, when Great Train Robbery came out, and then the late 80s with Untouchables, and late 90s with Entrapment. So see how he keeps that going. Kept it going all the way to the end of his career is impressive. And we've talked about possibly doing other series reviews that would encompass Sean Connery, and I really look forward to those. Specifically, we've talked about doing Indiana Jones, so of course we'll talk about Last Crusade. We've talked about maybe potentially doing Jack Ryan at some point, so Hunt for Red October would probably be on our
Radar.
radar. Yeah, and then another joke. I didn't even intend that to be a good one, so it worked. But and I've maybe at some point we can do kind of like a cult movie madness episode somewhere down the line. I would love to talk about Highlander uh, at some point in some capacity, but I don't want to do a Highlander series review because getting through those sequels would just be a pain. An enjoyable pain, but a pain nonetheless. But but no, there's tons of stuff, and then we of course we talked about doing Nick Cage and The Rock, which you've already mentioned. Again, a huge charm. That's the kind of the big appeal of that movie for Connery is his charm in that movie. So I don't know, just kind of my closing thoughts on Connery is that we've talked about him so much in Bond, talking about Bond. I was trying to decide if I was going to mention this or not, um, but I texted you earlier about something I read in a Ebert review of Great Train Robbery of all things, where he was talking about he really enjoyed Connery's comedic performance and everything in that film, which I don't disagree with, but he said the Bond movies with their violent pyrotechnics and bizarre special effects are somehow remembered as thrillers. Not really so. They were stylish, droll comedies that were flavored with thrills, and Connery played Bond with an understated comic character. Maybe that's why George Lazenby and Roger Moore have never quite filled Connery's shoes as Bond. They played 007 too straight. I'm just gonna let that simmer for a minute for anybody listening. And I know Jesse has said that he likes Roger Ebert when he quotes something that is kind of silly that he said. Um, I also like Roger Ebert a lot. I think he's one of the greatest critics of all time, if not the greatest. But that doesn't mean that he was always right. Um, and I think that was a silly take. What I was going to say is that we talked about in our Bond marathon, just how control of that character Connery had from the beginning, and I do think he did play things straight. There are times that, and we talked about the first, especially the first three uh, Bond films are thrillers. And yes, there are enjoyable things to them. Yes, there's a sense of humor to them. Yes, there is crowd pleasing moments and um, all sorts of traditions that we now have what is in the traditional Bond series. But at the same time, he didn't just go through every scene with a smile on his face and wink at the camera. That was very much something, and even he didn't do it to the extent I'm kind of making it sound like, but that was very much Roger Moore. Um, the Connery did take it seriously. Now that doesn't mean that there weren't Connery films, Bond films that weren't serious, but he did have a way to make you believe in something that may not be so believable. And how can you say that's not playing it straight? I think that's what kind of worked about Entrapment to go back, is that like Connery believes in it enough that you can believe in it. Even you can tear it apart after the fact, but the stuff that's silly in it and ridiculous, like the age difference between them, or the just the plot in general, um, he can take it seriously enough, but he also doesn't take it too seriously. That's a difference between just being comedic and playing it straight. And I think he can do both very well. And that's what made him so charming too, is that he could do a Bond film very well, but he could also turn around and be in something like the Untouchables, which is more serious and much more much even though it has good feelings to it, it's much less humor, and he can do both and still just be Sean Connery and do it flawlessly. And I think that speaks volumes about the kind of actor he was and just the kind of personality and persona on screen that he had. And I was saddened when I learned that he passed away, because he, big part of my childhood as yours, and just someone that I have always associated with being a movie star. And I just really enjoyed watching these three films. Watched one that I consider one of the best he's been in, and then got to see Entrapment and see what it was all about besides what I remembered, and I did enjoy it. And then going back to Great Train Robbery and getting to see it and just seeing what a fun movie that is. And I think I have I'm gonna add Michael Crichton's Great Train Robbery to my to be read list on Goodreads tonight and try to find a copy of it, because now I just I really do want to see it. And talking about it again after seeing it, it's just kind of got me excited about, because I really did enjoy it.
Going to another pull quote from reviews, this one for Entrapment from the Austin Chronicle, Marjorie Baumgarten. If it's a good heist movie you're after, there are surely better ways to go than with this limp caper. And if there's one thing you could say about Entrapment, is it isn't limp. So uh, taking us back full circle again, the ending of Entrapment is where but a train,
Right.
uh, train station. And one of my favorite moments in Entrapment that doesn't quite make sense is how quickly there are trains just going back and forth at opportune moments for the characters to disappear or reappear.
Yeah.
And at one moment, Connery is gone, and then he's there, and he's out of breath, uh, which is just a nice little funny character moment, as much as it maybe doesn't quite make sense how quickly he could have maneuvered and not been noticed by all the authorities that have somehow conveniently disappeared and not noticed Connery running around. But him being out of breath there behind Catherine Zeta Jones uh, is a funny little detail, but it's also like almost in a way a lovely little character detail and a character touch. And Connery had a way of not taking himself too seriously at so many occasions, and a big part of that is, in spite of him being a great leading actor, I think he also knew how to just have fun, but also knew to really be in character when the moment called for it. He had range that he doesn't always get credit for. Not in his voice; he doesn't have range in his voice, in his accents. Because in
Right.
the Untouchables, he's supposed to be Irish, by the way,
Yeah.
not Scottish. But it doesn't matter because he's so good
Right.
that he could still win an Oscar, and everybody's like, Scottish, Irish, who cares?
Right.
Even people that are probably Irish are like, whatever, like it's Sean Connery.
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Maybe there's an Irishman that hears me say that and it's like, are you kidding me? Screw Sean Connery. He should have been Irish. Should have been an Irishman playing that part or something.
It should have been Paul Newman. Oh,
Connery is. He's like we said. Repeating myself over again. He's synonymous with movies for me, and there are so many movies of his that could be worth talking about at some juncture. And I also want to point out things that I point out before, like we can make too big a deal about legacy sometimes in terms of you're only as good as your last thing, like that's such a silly notion.
right.
Look over his career and tell me that's not a great career. Holy cow. So many great directors he worked with, so many of the best movies that he was on. It's all over the place. And some true classics. Like he was really quite something. He was quite the movie star. Before we go too far, I can't to keep forgetting that I haven't I don't think given a grade for Entrapment, which I'd give a B- to,
Okay. Yeah.
which is a pretty good place to be. Sometimes just for the sake of it, we'll maybe try to rank the movies that we discussed in an episode like this, but there's no point in us trying to rank these movies because it's clear how we rank them.
Yeah. Right.
And it's no question which one's the best, which one's the worst, and in the middle, like it's all right there in the ratings we give in these movies. And that's not to say that it wasn't fun watching all of them in their own way. Great Train Robbery in particular is just a fun ride, and I'm glad it exists. And even if it's not as top tier in some ways, it's still up there. Are you kidding me? Like it's
right.
Definitely on the list of ones to watch and watch again. One's worth checking out for people. I guess if you were going to make kind of tiers of ones to watch or not to watch, Entrapment wouldn't be one of the top ones to watch. But if you were to check it out, it's fine and it's good, and Connery's good in it.
Right.
If you're going to pick out Sean Connery flicks to watch, I at the same time I liked the spectrum of his career over decades. We've been earlier in his career with Dr. No, but and Bond from there, but that is quite a legacy he left behind. Rest in peace, Sir Sean Connery. Drew, my friend, I'll see you soon enough for more movie marathon mood in the future and Sean Connery episodes that we will certainly do at some point.
Indeed. And thanks for going on this ride with me and giving me an excuse to go back and kind of find one of those movies I wish I had grown up with, and then of course get to watch one that I have grown up with and absolutely adore. And I echo your thoughts of wishing the rest for Sean and in his passing, and just an incredible actor, incredible legacy, and it's been a privilege to be able to talk about him.
Thanks everybody for tuning in. See you next time on Movie Marathon Mood.